Hey, welcome to session 5 on our teaching on marriage and family counseling. And I hope this series has been helpful to you. Again, much of it is based upon my book, Marriage and Family Life, which I hope you've already gotten. And anyway, let's get into dysfunctional families. And let me just say to you, I do understand what a dysfunctional family is. It's essentially, about 70%, it's said, of the American population, and I think that would probably be seen worldwide, is raised in what's called a less than healthy or functional family system, dysfunctional family. I mean, I was raised in that, and I won't go into great detail, but I mean, my mom and dad were both only children. They had both been abused as children. And so, but what they wanted when they got married, the goal of their life was to have family. They loved all of us to the best of their ability. Did they love us unconditionally? They wouldn't know unconditional if it was a truck that ran them over. It just, it's not a part of them. And it's not a part of most people raised in dysfunctional families for a number of reasons. But anyway, they did their best. They had lots of arguments. They separated a couple times. They almost got divorced. In fact, they were on the last day or two before divorce and got back together. Crazy in many, many ways. And yet they made it 55 years, thank God. And somehow, I mean, my sister, of course, she had problems. My brother, he's had problems. But, at least one of us turned out practically perfect in, well, of course, you're not buying that, are you? All of us are affected by the families in which we're raised in, but I mean, it was pretty nutty. So I want to talk a little bit about, different aspects of dysfunctional families. And, that can come from, verbal or emotional abuse, which we had a lot of that in my family growing up. My parents, there was times when I really, if I was smart, I would have recorded some of their arguments. They had some incredible one-liners as they tried to ridicule and condemn and put each other down and criticize. And oh my goodness, they would rip into each other right in front of us kids as though it was normal. And maybe it was normal because from their families that they were raised in, they were actually better than their parents were. Amazing. But anyway, sometimes ignoring a child by not listening, not responding, giving a child choices which are only, negative, either eat your dinner or, you're going to get a spanking. There's no positive to it. It's always negative. Sometimes overprotecting a child, blaming others for a child's symptoms. That happens a lot nowadays. Or communicating double messages like, I love you, go play on the freeway. I mean, that's not, which is it? You love me or you want me to get run over? So all of that can cause various and sundry symptoms within a person's life. So, in the counseling process, when you're dealing with a marriage or a family situation, you're listening for these kinds of things. Are they giving subtle, sarcastic messages between each other? Do they argue a lot? Is there, or have they been raised in a family where there was a lot of verbal or physical, emotional, even sexual abuse? All of that can clearly hurt and hamper a healthy relationship. Sometimes even things like perfectionism, which is a common source of many family problems because, nobody's perfect, but there can be a lot of pressure placed upon kids to do better or go farther than what mom and dad have. This can create a certain level of anger and angst in the children because they can never seem to measure up to mom and dad's standards. Now, we do see this more in some cultural groups, but it's across the board, where parents in many ways want to live vicariously through the success of their children. And but it leads to reaction and response in the children. Some will embrace it and go for it and achieve great things, but an equal percentage will reject the parents' pressure and rebel, quote unquote, against it. They may not be running to something, they may be running away from the pressure that they find within their family. And these are, as you're asking questions and exploring the story of what's gone wrong in a family, you'll see these things will come up. Sticks and stones, it says, will break my bones, but words are even more devastating. Disapproving scowls, critical harping are some of the ways a perfectionist will speak to their children. The conversation is sprinkled with should and shouldn't and must and have to and ought. And it's predominantly negative, rarely ever positive or affirming. And this can really be almost torturous to a child. And yet, most children, as they grow up, I mean, if they've received, inappropriate correction like that, or even worse, abuse of some sort, they will often vow, I'm not going to be like my mom, I'm not going to be like my dad. But as we all know, oftentimes we tend to repeat the same patterns. In most dysfunctional families, what you'll find is they don't have much fun. Some families are just too serious. And, so often a child misses out on their childhood. They're only rewarded, if rewarded at all, for being more adult rather than being a child. Children need to play. I mean, there's lots of research to indicate that part of how we grow in relationship, even grow academically, happens through the process of play. Play is essential. And yet, for many kids, they're raised in non-happy, non-jokey, non-fun families. It's one of the good things, at least I had in my mom and dad. I mean, they yelled and screamed, and they laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed. Many times with my folks, I mean, we'd come into the house, and we wanted to go hide because they were at each other. And other times, we would tell them, hey, go get a room, because they were, passionate and loving and dancing and singing and laughing together. Yeah, they were a bit nuts, but man, there was never a dull moment, I will say that, in my family. Some people will put on kind of like almost like a spirit of martyrdom. Poor me. They distort the reality of the situation that they live in. There are people have a high tolerance for personal abuse and pain, but they kind of live with that. That's who they are. They are the consummate victim. And as such, they tend to pass on that sense of victimization to their kids. In other words, they develop what we would simply call a victim mentality. The children often grow up seeing their parents punishing themselves through overwork, eating disorders, substance abuse, etc. And they see themselves as victims, and the next generation picks that up and tends to exacerbate it from there on. In most, again, dysfunctional families, there's a significant amount of entanglement. Again, there's there's a concept, the bonding concept. It's the attachment. And healthy attachment is needed for children, for couples, to have a healthy home. You need to have a healthy attachment. Healthy attachment honors boundaries, recognizes that you're you and I'm me. But in an entangled, enmeshed families, there's constant violation of boundaries. Families have too close an emotional relationship with each other. What's going on with mom and dad affects how I'm doing at school or how I relate to my friends. Rather than taking the energy necessary to learn and to grow, children put that into simply surviving the craziness of mom and dad. Individual identities get blurred and diminished. And so that thus, if one member is depressed, everybody gets depressed. I mean, it's a very, very rocky kind of family system. And so when you have these dysfunctional patterns that one has been raised with, you often will see that they get dragged into then a marriage. Again, in marriage and family life, especially from a Christian worldview, we understand that really the principles for marriage are found primarily in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and then later on in some New Testament passages. Maybe a little bit in Song of Solomon. That's the fun part. But when we talk about marriage, marriage is ultimately designed to fulfill needs with each other. Legitimate needs, God-ordained needs for companionship, for fellowship, for relationship, for intimacy, etc. And we know that both, husband and wife, they have needs. The needs are not, again, just physical, but they're emotional, They're mental, they're spiritual, they're economic, etc. So physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging needs, self-esteem needs, actualization needs, all of those needs, the hope is when a couple gets married are going to be met by my Prince Charming or by the princess that I've just married. Now we know that's delusional, of course, because nobody comes into a marriage perfect. In fact, everybody comes in with their own baggage. And if someone has been raised in a highly dysfunctional family because of alcohol, drug abuse, domestic violence, or just crazy communication patterns within the family like we've already discussed, they will tend to bring that. And thus, again, what we hope is that they'll leave to cleave, but most couples, they don't leave. They just bring their baggage in with an expectation that, number one, my partner already knows what my baggage is. That's a wrong assumption, because nobody can really fully understand the crazy that you've been raised in. They also, number two, the assumption is that, of course, because you love me and you're so powerful and you're so gracious, you can kiss away all of my boo-boos. Wrong, buffalo breath. That just is not going to happen. In fact, what happens is we tend to find the same problems in our spouse that we found in our mom and dad's relationship. We project onto them our needs, but we also tend to see and reinforce, it's called a self-fulfilling prophecy, what we believe our spouse is going to turn out to be. Where do we learn that from? Primarily from our family of origin. How are men similar to my dad and people like that in my relationships? How are women like my mom, like my sister, whatever the major role models have been, and we tend then to project those things onto our new relationship. Although most relationships start out with lots of fun and excitement and romance, etc., they tend to degenerate relatively soon, but mainly after about 18 months when the high level of romance begins to wane. That's when we start to see real problems in most relationships. So in the beginning, we recognize that there's needs, but the needs are primarily the needs that God has given us that we need to focus on. So we're going to look more about that in our next session, and we're going to really deal with what it takes, the maturity necessary to have a healthy relationship. And so we're going to look at, we've already talked about the importance of belonging and worth and all of that, but we're going to really look at, what is love, what is maturity, what are the things necessary foundationally to build a healthy marriage. Now, why do we need to understand that for counseling? Because, part of the counseling process is to present some models that they may not have seen before. But not models that are too difficult for them to reach. No, things that are reachable. They can begin to work toward loving each other in a mature and other-focused way, which will begin to build bridges and hopefully help in the marriage process. So until next time, I'm Dr. Stan. God bless.